Tiffany, thank you so much for joining me on the Path podcast here. I'm excited to have you. We're going to talk a lot about self-storage, some commercial stuff. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. This is exciting. I enjoy, talking about my passion and things like that. So,
Mhm. Awesome. So how did you first get started in real estate? And what's a little bit of background on you?
okay. Let's see. So I married my husband, put him through school, always interested in real estate. My parents had real estate growing up, but they never like sat us down and taught us, hey, this is what you got to do. They were actually the type that were like, go to school and get a good job. And I was like, why did you tell me that? Why did you teach me that? It was so weird when they were kind of doing the opposite. I think in their eyes, it was the security, there can be ups and downs in real estate and a lot of unpredictability. And so for them, it's like, just get a good job, it'll pay you, whatever. So was kind of introduced early on as far as that goes, just seeing it, never really sat down and taught real estate. But through school, thought it's always in the back of my mind. And finally, when we got out of student debt and all these things, we decided, hey, let's start some investing here, and we kind of went down that route. So that's how we got into real estate. It always made sense to me. I think it was in college, and I finally saw. I never knew how much money my parents made, and I knew they had some real estate. And I saw a tax return, and I was like, you don't go to work, but you make that money, right? And it was just like my mind was blown. I'm like, okay, so I get it. Yes, they work. It wasn't this 9 to 5 where they always had to be there. So that's kind of what I wanted. I wanted to buy back my time. I wanted to be able to, have passive income, or what they call it. You still have to work. Nothing is ever passive,
Mhm.
but I get to choose. Hey, do I want to do it at 9 a.m. or 8 p.m.? I can typically move my schedule around a little bit and
Yeah.
not be tied down. So
hmm
that was kind of the start of my interest in real estate.
hmm So what was your first property that you ever bought?
So, and that was the other thing, is a lot of people start small and they go to the residential and they buy a single family home. And when I started thinking about real estate, I've heard go bigger sooner. And my father said, don't do single family homes. And I was like, okay, I'll do
hmm
multifamily then, huh? Like I knew better. And I came across some self storage ideas, and my mind was a little bit blown. I think there's a whole world out there that most of us don't know about, and usually you start hearing about it by either other people or through a job, right? You don't go out looking for this. And so I had heard about it, and I ran the idea across my husband, and he was like, that's actually a great idea. I love the idea. And so I just went for it. We went for self storage from the very beginning. I thought go bigger sooner. And I didn't at that time want to mess with, residential. I didn't want to do single family for those reasons. So we kind of started there. We did buy a small medical office building very, very first, but it was commercial nonetheless. And then I moved into self storage.
hmm Why was your dad saying to go bigger sooner? Was there some type of like you'll just learn fast because it's like so overwhelming type of aspect to
Yeah,
it?
well, so he wasn't the one that said that, but he said don't do single family. But I
Okay.
had just heard a lot of motivational people, or a lot of people in real estate who got bigger and bigger, and they were like, man, I probably could have skipped 10 steps. Granted, they learn things along the way. There's stuff that you learn, but and even in self storage, when I was there's so many nuances that we could talk for hours about it. But there's, how many square feet am I going to go for? How big of a building can I go for? So if you think about that, or in commercial real estate, do I want 3,000 square feet or do I want 40? There's a big difference there. So even in self storage, going bigger sooner means something different. Some people, I'm like, I would never go to self storage. That's scary. That's intimidating. You can start smaller and still have it be a bigger deal than a single family home or things like that. And even with what I started at, I'm like, man, if I could have gone bigger sooner, even in that, it's just would have been awesome. So
hmm When you went bigger sooner, what was the like money aspect of partners and down payments types of challenges that you had to kind of go through with you and your husband?
yeah, so that's probably the hardest thing that most people get hung up on is the money. And I've heard time and time again, the money is going to be so easy to find. If you find the right deal, and if you find a good deal, the money comes out of the money is easier to find than the deals. And it's so true. It is so true. I get people that are, they're like swimming in money, but they don't have deals or the knowledge or the time. And so if you can provide that to them and show them, I think you mentioned you've taken on a few investors. You
Hmm.
probably have all the time in the world. I don't know how old you are right now or if it even matters, but I'm like, you've got a lot of time. And as you get older and older, when you have money, you don't have time. When you have time, you might not have
Hmm.
money. And so as far as getting started, you have to have some money, whether that's your own, whether it's investors. Typically, a down payment on a commercial property is going to be anywhere from 20 to 40% if you're getting a loan. Now, if you sell or finance, that's different. Maybe they won't. They'll take 5 or 10% down. It's going to be depending on the deal you make, and that's another thing I've learned along the way is there isn't only one way to structure a deal. You can be so creative and you can say, well, if you set the price, I set the terms. Like the owner
Hmm.
doesn't get their cake and eat it too, and vice versa. You kind of have to compromise. But when I put an offer on a deal, I give them 3 offers. I don't just say, hey, here's what I'm going to offer you. But I say, well, if I bank finance it, here's what I offer you. If you finance it, here's what I'm going to offer you, and here's something kind of in between. And I like to gauge if they start leaning one way or the other. It's so good because most of the time they're just going to say, well, no. If you just give them one offer, no. But when I hear the broker say, ooh, they're leaning towards this offer, they're leaning towards seller finance. For me, that's the green light, and we can start negotiating from there. But if it's just a hard no, you've
Hmm.
already like shut yourself out.
Hmm. Yeah. So for this first property of the storage facility that you bought, was it here in Colorado?
Yeah. So let me rewind a little bit. The very, very first one we did was actually a joint venture with some partners, and I was able to use that as kind of my mentorship. I said, well, I'm going to dive in as kind of a hands off, give a little bit of money for this deal with the exception that you're going to kind of coach me along the way to getting my own deal. And
Mm-hmm.
there were no deals. It was so hard to compete with deals in self storage because it became the darling of commercial real estate. If everybody wanted to go after it, they could all see the play there with the value add and the month to month rents. And so it was hard to compete, and I was not finding deals. And so I'm like, well, let me put a little bit of eggs in this basket to get me started if I don't find my own deal. And then about 6 or 8 months later, I finally found my own deal and was able to kind of work through that whole thing with the help of my mentor. And that the original deal was in Missouri. Uh, this one was in Denver, though, the one that like we solely own ourselves. So we have 4 other facilities with partners and then some
Hmm.
warehouses and things like that. So yeah, it was in Denver.
Hmm. So when you were finding the one in Denver, let's say, what was your strategy for finding? Was it off market? Was it on market? And what did you do to, if it was off market?
Yeah, so off market. So I kind of went the old school way and I sent out a bunch of letters to owners. And it was probably my second round of letters. I didn't really have the guts to call people yet. I think that's where a lot of people are going with it these days is you got to call, you have to create relationship with these owners. And because I'll be honest, I probably get 1 to 2 letters a week for my facility. And if or when I decide to ever sell, I'll probably just go, do I have any of these letters left over? Or whoever's contacted me in the last week or month, maybe that's who I'll go with. And maybe everybody
Hmm.
doesn't have that same idea, but I don't want to take the effort to go back to the 15 or 30 other people that have contacted me. I'm going to take the path of least resistance. And so I sent out a round of letters and I wasn't getting any good hits. All the hits I was getting was like, how'd you get my number? Or we're it was more they wanted to either bring me on as an investor or sell me a product. They didn't want to talk about their
Yeah.
facility. And I finally changed my search criteria. I lowered my square footage threshold just a little bit and I sent out 10 more letters. And this guy, he called me and he said, hey, I got your letter on no, he said, Wednesday, my daughter told me she wasn't going to help me run the facility anymore. Thursday, I got your letter. And Friday, I'm calling you. So I bet he had
Wow.
10 or 15 other letters a month before that he was like, no, 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 I'm not selling. And then the minute something in his life changed, and that's when if you're wanting to get into commercial or self-storage or anything, it might be no, 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 no. But the minute something in their life changes, he didn't want to run it. His daughter had been helping him run it for 15 years, and just overnight she decides, I'm done. So he's like, fine, I'm going to sell it. And that was what kind of opened the door with him. And I think 9 times out of 10, at least if there's a facility or any commercial real estate that's going really well for someone, they're not going to sell unless if their life circumstance changes. Or some people, well, when the market's great, well, I'm going to get so much money for it. Why would I not just sell it right now? And at least in my experience, that's what I've found, that life circumstances change. I even talked with owners that said, my dad owns it. He's 85. We're kind of just waiting for him to pass on. And at that point, we'll sell it. So if you get in contact with these older people, and then they know that's the plan because they want that step up in basis when they're parent. Why would I sell now when maybe in the next year or 5 years we will have to minimize our tax bill extremely a lot by getting that step up?
So you did owner financing on this one?
No, so this one we did come up with we did get a loan from the bank, and rates were really low at the time, so it was pretty favorable. And so we purchased, and I've done other seller finance deals, so that's a whole different beast right there. But
Mm-hmm.
when the rates are really low, it's hard to seller finance, because the seller's not going to say, well, sure, I'll take 3%.
Yeah.
They don't, but
Mm-hmm.
when the rates are high and they still want that high price, they might seller finance. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've done seller financing on my fourplex when I
okay.
bought it just in August. So I'm kind of familiar with different terms, and you really can kind of create it to whatever you want it to be based off of the seller had the price and was like, okay, then these are my terms, and got the rate to
Yep.
where it all still made sense for me to live in the property and live for free too, which was the
And
cool part.
how much did you have to put down?
So that's the crazy thing is they also financed 100,000 of the down payment, and then I
Oh,
was the real estate agent on the deal. So then they paid me 25,000. So I only paid $5,000 as my down payment to purchase this
that's
property,
awesome.
which was really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that,
hmm
seeing the creativity and, what you can negotiate on these deals. So,
hmm When you are like you were first starting for looking at a property in Denver, what type of square foot and other metrics were you looking for to target down one that you'd be interested in, and one that would make a good deal as well?
yeah, so I kind of looked along the whole Front Range, Colorado Springs, Denver, a little bit out in Utah, just markets that I was more familiar with and comfortable with, from Utah. So I'd have a lot of family out there. Grew up, I know what areas. And there's there's kind of there's three different ball games, I think, in storage. There's the very small, maybe under 20,000 square foot facilities that maybe are in smaller towns, or they need, well, let me rewind. So there's that, then there's kind of your middle, anywhere between 20 to 60,000 square feet. And then anything above 60,000 square feet is a whole nother ball game. Your Cube Smarts, Extra Space, all those big third party managed. And when you hit a certain level, your expenses don't go up the same amount as the income does. And so,
Okay.
for example, I, in order for me to pay a manager, I was trying for 40,000 square feet, because if I have less than 40,000 square feet, I'm still paying a manager about the same, but I'm not making as much money, right? So if I hit up to 30, 40,000 square feet, I can pay a manager, and anything above that square footage wise, that's just cream on the top. That's just more income, but my expenses are roughly still the same. So that was my goal. And I've learned throughout the process, there's so much automation that can help you also. So I now only have a part-time, or they call it kind of a boots on the ground, and not necessarily a manager that's taking in clients every day, but they're just doing anything that physically has to be done on site, whether it's overlocking units, cleaning out a unit, they're there to do that part-time. Everything else is automated. So we have a call center that answers every single call. And
Oh,
and the
okay.
reason, yeah, I love that because let's say I hire a manager that's just not a great person and they want to immediately start skimming things off the top, or hey, they're going to rent some units on the side. Well, any call that comes in, it's recorded, and I could go on my app and see all the calls coming in or any major problems that get reported. And I
Mhm.
have loved that about the call center and the automation.
Is this a call center specifically for self-storage and taking calls?
Yes, yes, it
Okay.
is. Now there are a lot of different call centers. I went with the one that I went with. They're like the Chick-fil-A of storage call
Okay.
centers, of the way that they like to advertise, and they really do a
Mhm.
great job.
Mhm.
They changed the game for me, I think. But so I wanted a higher square footage count, but when you get too high, then you're competing with a lot of institutional investors. And
Mhm.
I was competing against Public Storage on one here last year. I'm like, well, I mean, I can't pay what they can pay. They will overpay a little bit just to get. And the crazy thing was they had a facility less than around the corner and one less than a mile away. I was like, okay, so they just want to dominate that little
Mhm.
area. And I'm guessing they were going to use the same manager for all three sites, right? Because then it saves them money. But as you get too large, you're competing with all those people. So it gets a little bit hairy in that regard. So I was looking for 40 to 60,000 square feet. That was kind of my sweet spot. And I'm at 32,000, which it's still great. It
Mhm.
works out. But
How many units does
anyway,
that end up being, total overall that you're managing over, say, on the Denver one?
okay. Yeah. So that's where it gets weird because of unit sizes.
Mhm.
So just take this for example. I have 32,000 square feet and I only have 150 units because I've got some fairly large units. And there was another property that went up for sale. It was only 20,000 square feet, but it had 224 units. And in some ways, people might want more units. However, if you have a million small units that don't rent, wouldn't you rather just have a couple bigger units that are like there's a waiting list a mile long? Because
Mhm.
the argument is, well, my smaller units get me better dollar per square foot. So all my smaller units are about $2.12 a square foot. My largest unit, it's 80 cents a square foot. But I have three to five small units that are available all the time. They're just turned over
Yeah.
a lot more. And
Mhm.
so I probably make more on this other unit and it's constantly rented. And I've been raising the rent on that one slowly. I mean, you wouldn't believe when I first got this place, they were at like for an 800 square foot unit, it was like 3 or 400 bucks, and now I'm up to
Mhm.
680. So I'm like, okay, so we're getting closer. My goal is to get closer to that dollar per square foot.
Mhm.
But on average, if I look at a facility and say, oh, it's 30,000 square feet, I want to be able to calculate I'm making at least a dollar per square foot. So I'm thinking that
Okay.
facility should be making 30,000 a month, um, give or take, you know.
Uh-huh. Got it. Okay, so that's what I was wondering is what type of square foot do you wanna make per each property per month? So $1 square foot, is that like a Colorado rule or is that like a self-storage
Yeah.
rule?
Yeah.
Um,
So you're not going to get the same thing out in like Missouri, for example.
uh-huh.
When I
Yeah.
look at some of the rates, so if you just think of 10 by 10, that's 100 square feet,
Mhm.
$100 a month. So if
Mhm.
you're looking nationally and you see a market that should be at a dollar a square foot and they're renting it for $80, then that tells you they probably are a little bit desperate to get people in. That probably tells you they're not full. And so, but if you do look at a market, like I said, like Missouri, our rates are a lot lower there because just cost of living is less. All the expenses are going to be less. So you might still have the same margins, but your
Mhm.
rents are going to be lower. So you have to know what's normal for that market. So yeah, Denver specifically, Colorado Springs, you're going to want a dollar a square foot or more
Mhm.
on average. Like I said, the bigger units less, the smaller units more.
Mhm. Got it. Would you say you wanna have a good variety of mix of unit sizes too?
Yes. Yeah, I think having a good mix is important because everyone obviously needs different things. You don't want a million little 5x5s because that's like
Mhm.
a closet, right? If you're going to
Yeah.
go and rent something, you're probably, if you don't have a closet of space in your house, you're going to want something bigger. And so I think, and also those tenants tend to be a little bit stickier. I think a 10 by 10 is kind of the standard. 10 by
Mhm.
20 is very desirable for a lot of people. So yes, you need a variety. And a lot of times if, like, let's say you were going to go build or even buy, you can get a feasibility study that will say, hey, in your market, there are this many 5x5s and there are this is how many you should have. And the same with apartment complexes. They would say, well, this is
Mhm.
the housing need. This is what is currently there. And so they can kind of tell you how well it's going to do. Some people will buy a facility knowing there's too many 5x5s, knowing, well, I can knock out a few walls and make
Oh,
those
okay.
bigger. So you can move things around a little bit if you kind of know what you're doing. So
Mhm. Gotcha. Would you say that for when you are analyzing a property, do you what's like the like for residential? I always look at PITI and HOA and like your reserves and expenses. Um, is it the same thing for self storage? Where or how do they change in terms of like insurance costs or what you want to have for reserves for vacancy and maintenance and capex?
yeah, so the difference, I think, there's obviously what's currently happening with the current ownership. They're going to run it
Hmm.
differently than you are, right? So the thing that I always look at are the fixed expenses that I can't change, like taxes, like you just said, the insurance, things like that. There are certain things that, reserves, you probably want like 25 cents a square foot for that. For maintenance, 15 cents a square foot. There are um, companies. There is a national company that once a year they release a book that gives the whole national average of, okay, on the East Coast, this is how much your expenses should be. Midwest, and it kind of breaks it down, and that's nice because it can change, and you want to see, am I falling in that range for Colorado? So some
Hmm.
places might be more to insure. Like there were a ton of
Yeah.
commercial insurance companies that pulled out of Colorado because of all the hail, so you
Hmm.
can't even get insurance, and the insurance premiums are going up because of that, because they don't want to pay for roof hail damage. And so I look at those fixed expenses and then I take all my expenses. So if they don't have software, I'm going to add my software. I'm going to put all those expenses in, and knowing, okay, my credit cards are already going to be between 2% and 2.5% fee to take credit cards. Well, at least
Hmm.
that money's going to make it to the bank. So I'm probably going to
Yeah.
say no cash, because I at least know
Okay.
I'd rather pay 2% than 100% if it
Yeah.
gets stolen or doesn't make, things like that.
Uh-huh.
So yes, there are fixed expenses that once I take their numbers, then I plug my own in to see what my returns are going to be.
Uh-huh. For in terms of software, what software do you have? Like the phone company, the payment processing one. Are there any others for like getting in more inbound leads?
Yeah. So the software that I use is Store Edge, and
Okay.
they have a three-prong um, storage portfolio. They have like three different products that they offer. One of them um, was their original, that they said, well, if you're like international, we recommend. There's different reasons for each one. There was kind of a lower budget one for maybe these smaller facilities. Um, and the one that I decided to go with, they were pushing all of their resources to improving that one specifically. And so I thought, well, if you're putting the most money into that one, I'm going to go for that one because I know it's going to be the best eventually. Um,
Hmm.
and the other great thing is they integrate with a lot of other things, like your gate. You want to be able, if I put a new tenant in, I want my gate to open when they put their gate code in, things like that. And the call center also integrates. So they, well, let's see, do they I mean, yeah, I did all this. I like set it and forget it type thing. So I'm having to remember all
Hmm.
the things. But the call center is called automated for storage, because if you Google automated,
Hmm.
there's a
Yeah.
ton of ton of that. So it's all automated call center for storage, and they've been really great. They send me a spreadsheet every month of like how many calls they address, and of the, let's say, 240 calls a month in the summer, the busy season for storage is in the summer,
Mhm.
and of the 250 calls they probably send uh 10% to management, meaning, hey, here's something we can't handle, and so you need to address it. And usually that's like sometimes somebody wants to see a unit before they rent it. That's getting more rare because people kind of just understand, well, if
Mhm.
they want to see the unit before they're going to rent it, 9 times out of 10 is they're probably up to no good. They want to see if it's somewhere hidden in the facility that they can do something sketchy, or
Mm.
every once in a while you'll get that, like, the dude who just has to double check everything. I get that, but they want that face to face. Um,
Mhm.
what else were you asking me? I kind of get sidetracked a little bit.
Yeah, no worries. But that does bring up another question I have is, do you have issues with people trying to live in the units, and how do you avoid that?
Yeah, so actually that was one of your questions. You were kind of uh, that is our biggest problem is, and especially when the economy starts to get hard for people. Um, they loiter a lot, they hang around a lot, they're just always there. And so the one thing we do is, and it's without fail, right after they move in. It's not like they kind of fly under the radar for a while and then start doing it. And so anytime we have a
Mhm.
new move in, if there is like excessive in and out for 2 weeks on and off, I know immediately that they are in and out of that. They're living out of that unit. And so the first thing we do, we shut the power off for that building. Luckily, our lease,
Okay.
even though we do have power, the lease says we do not provide power, correct? And so we're not obligated to give
Okay.
them power. And so we shut the power off. We make sure, because you'll see sometimes, oh, they had an entry at 8:45, but there was no exit at night before 9 p.m. So then I'm going to look in the morning gate log. So our gate tracks every time they come in and out of there. And I see, oh, they tried to exit. They exited at 6:02. There was no entry. So I knew they were in overnight. So I immediately we kind of warn them, hey, you gotta, you can't be in here overnight. There has to be a verbal, written, and you want to do everything you can to
Mhm.
protect yourself from just being discriminatory or anything that they may accuse you of. And so
Mhm.
it's kind of watching for those behaviors and getting them out as fast as possible. So that's the
Mhm.
one beauty with storage versus living is, because they're not living there and it's actually illegal for them. So if they're there overnight, you can call the police and cite them for trespassing.
Mhm.
And like I said, shutting off the power, giving them, a warning, uh, verbal, written, and then a third time we evict them. And usually they're out before the month's out because
Mm.
they just can't leave it alone. They're there all the time. They don't care. They're just going to go to the next facility and
Mhm.
find, the same thing. So getting them out sooner is better.
Mm.
But
Do you think it's
yeah,
good
it
to have
happens.
some type of on-site manager because of that reason, so that they can go to the unit and like get them out if needed?
So there has been a lot of change in the last 5 to 7 years on resident managers. And I don't know, the verdict still might be out. A lot of new institutional investors and companies have been moving away from a resident manager position. And a big reason is, well, if you have somebody living there and managing it and they're not working out, how do you kick them out of their house and their job? Or if they are
Mhm.
working for you and you let them go but they still live there, what could they possibly do in that 90 days that you're trying to get them out of there? So
Mhm.
um I can see both sides. If you do eventually find that great manager that's just going to stay there and monitor it, I moved away from that model because I don't think that them approaching somebody at 10 o'clock at night anyway is safe or is going to do. It's like, no, just call the police. Hey, the police comes in, they can escort them out, and that's that. You don't even need to be there for that. So
Mhm.
um I don't know. I can see both sides of it. The hard thing is, like I said, just getting stuck with somebody who maybe isn't the best fit, you know, for
Mhm.
your
For terms
facility.
of value add that can be done, ideally increasing rental rates would be one way. Is there anything else that can be done in separate, like increasing rent or like changing the unit size that kind of not many people think about for adding value?
Yeah. So obviously, the first and easiest to add value is that rental rate increase. There's also some tenant protection plans. So a lot of these mom and pop operators don't have tenant insurance or tenant, just like when you rent an apartment, you have to have renter's insurance, right? And so
Mhm,
same thing applies to these units. You can add on tenant protection plans. We require it at our facility. And so um, they have to pay an extra $11 a month. Some of that we keep. So that to us is value add. But then also, if something happens, then all they do is call the insurance company, depending on what their, so some of the plans like, well, we'll cover up to 2,000 and they get to decide. Then they'll cover up to 2,000 in damages or whatnot. So it's beneficial on both sides. It gives us value add, but it also gives the tenant some kind of something to fall back on if, let's say, flood damage or a fire, or because we're not responsible for anything that they store in their unit, and that's why we provide
mhm,
these protection plans. The other big thing is automation. So obviously, if you want to increase your income, you can do one of two things. You can either increase the income with rents and things, or you can decrease your expenses. And I think doing both of those obviously is ideal. So automation actually lowered a ton of expenses that um, we just, like I said, even paying somebody, $15 to $20 an hour to basically just sit there all day to collect money versus I'll just pay my call center who's already answering all the calls. They can take payment. They take probably 90% of the payments. And then we'll have a few people that will go online and pay. So automating
mhm,
everything is really good to help add value. And then the other piece, if there is an apartment on site, you can then rent that out to a tenant. Or more recently, I've decided instead of a person, I think I'm going to try to rent it to like an office for somebody who just needs some office space. Because
mhm,
once again, I don't want somebody. We had a tenant, they moved in. He was even vetted by the property management company. I did hire someone separately because for me, I know storage. I know the lien laws. I know how to get somebody in and out of storage, but I didn't want to do all the work for one tiny little apartment. So I'm like, I'm going to
mhm,
hire a company just for that. Well, they still let this guy in here who was horrible. I mean, he stopped paying after 3 months and then was out of town. Then his buddies were coming in and out all night long, or not all
mhm,
night long, just I'm sure like wreaking havoc. Well, I can't have, it's a business that we're running there, right? I can't just have
yeah,
these kind of sketchy people going in and out of there all the time. And so
mhm,
I thought, maybe I'm just going to rent this out to someone who needs like some IT guy that needs office space, or that needs like maybe a massage clinic. They just have
mhm,
one massage bed up there. They're just going to rent it. They're there during the day, during business hours. And if for some reason I needed to evict them, the laws are less stringent than
yeah,
someone who's actually living there. So those are kind of the
mhm,
value add strategies. I know there's others. People put solar panels on top because
okay.
then you can sell the power back, just small things like that.
Mm. Do you ever have issues with break-ins on the property? And how do you deal with like tenants' locks? Do they have their own lock? Do you provide a lock? And it's only the gate that you have them like you give them something?
Yeah, so we do have break-ins, and the odd thing is the only time we ever have a break-in is when we've had someone sketchy move in to the facility, and we start seeing these lock cuts, and we had this one. It was several nights in a row, and they always cut the small locks. So if you have these big
Mm,
round disc locks, they never cut those. We'd open the unit, and it's like nothing's missing. And one time we saw a blanket and a pillow. It was almost like a homeless person was just cutting the units open to sleep in there. And maybe if
mhm,
there was anything super valuable, maybe they would have taken it. But we would call the tenant and say, "Hey, your lock was cut," and they would come open it and say, "Nothing seems to be missing. I don't, you know." And the
mhm,
only time we actually had stuff stolen was a tenant that we evicted, and he didn't use the time window we gave him to clean his things out. And so we locked him out, and then he came back and broke into his own unit and stole
Mm.
his own stuff. And the odd thing was, most of it was still left there. I have a feeling there was either like, there was something in there that was valuable, who
Mhm.
knows, money, drugs, I don't know. And it was like, we just needed that one or two duffel bags, and the rest of it they left there.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
not a ton of break-ins, but it does happen. It always happens when we have a problem with someone trying to live out of the units. We notice, why is that lock cut? Who just moved in the last 3 days? And then
Mhm.
we start watching those people like a hawk. And the minute we get them out, the lock cuts stop happening. So,
Mhm. Yeah. So you're having your person that, manages it for you. They're monitoring to see if lots are cut whenever they go there, and they go every day, or are you watching like video cameras of this?
they go 3 times a week, and
Okay.
they do lock checks, and they'll do any property maintenance. So if the grass needs to be mowed, if the weeds need to be sprayed, if once somebody moves out, they have to check the unit, because if someone leaves their stuff behind, we're going to charge them for that, because
Mhm.
otherwise I'm paying someone to clean it up. So
Mhm.
every time that they are on site, they're doing a perimeter check, walking the property, picking up trash, and checking the locks.
Mhm.
So
Got
about
it.
three
And
times a week.
do you pay them like a salary for that, or is it more like a part-time job by the hour?
It's part-time by the hour. You could do both.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
previous manager was there full-time, and she was salary, but like I said, we don't need somebody there full-time anymore.
Mhm.
And so we'll usually do 3 days a week. Plus I do an additional just 2 hours on their time card, because checking the call center, if there was a call that needed to be addressed that same day, like, hey, the tenant, um, if somebody got locked in, let's say, and they couldn't get out, even then, the call center can usually click the button and let them out, right? But if there was
Mhm.
an example, hey, the gate got stuck open, we need you to swing by. So every morning she just wakes up and checks the call center. And so for that, I just say, I'm just going to pay you 2 hours, even if it only takes you 5 minutes, because then guess what? I don't even have to deal with it, look at it. If there's a problem that then I need to address,
Mhm.
she'll let me know and escalates it to me. So it's just
Mhm.
hourly for now.
Yeah. Um, so for leases, how does that work? And did you have your own created from like a real estate attorney in order to have it specific to each property, or is it just more generalized to all your properties?
So self storage has a different lease than just like commercial, for example. And I
Mhm.
took the original lease that they had, and I had an attorney look it over, and there were some things that needed updating. I don't know if I mentioned, I'm on the board for the Colorado Self Storage Association, and
Oh,
so
okay.
we
Sweet.
actually, yeah, I know, fun. We actually do provide a lease to all of our members. So,
Mhm.
and you can go, and there's a bunch of other documents in there that you could become a member, get all these, like the eviction notice, a bunch of documents that you might eventually have to send to your tenants for certain things.
Mhm.
Um, and so you can use that lease. And if there are certain fees that you wanted to, like, let's say my fee for trash being left out is $50, but you wanted it to be 65, you could change little things like that. But when it comes to the actual lien laws and when do I actually get to take possession of your stuff, those are the things that are important in your lease. And I
Mhm.
think we cover all that in the lease that we provide from the board.
Mhm. Got it. And then for like security cameras, do you just have them at all angles, and then do they record like the past 7 days, or if how deep do you have to have it going back in case a major issue comes up?
Yes, so that was one of the first things that we got implemented was better cameras. In fact, in about 2 weeks, I'm going up to meet about more. We kind of had to do it in two phases. And last year, or was it? It's been 2 years. It's about time we get better coverage. And a funny thing, the camera guy said, he's like, "Here's the thing with cameras: you always want more. You never have enough, right?" And so,
Mhm.
we have decent coverage of the front, the back, the office, but now we need to get better coverage down each aisle. In particular, we have a few
Mhm.
little, where those smaller units are, they're kind of in hallways, and that's where
Oh,
these homeless people, because they're like, this is perfect. I even have a hallway here. I can lay all my stuff out and
yeah.
park. So yeah, so getting security coverage, I think, is a big one. But as far as how long they record, um, I don't think 7 days is enough. We haven't had to use it back that far, but I think a month is how far back mine keeps it. And then if I need to save
Hmm.
any clips, it will keep that forever. Whatever I save, it'll keep
Hmm.
that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I at least 30 to 60 days I would recommend, because
Uh-huh.
what happens when now you've got an employee? Well, you don't find stuff out until a month or 2 months down the road. You want to try and go back as far as you can if there's
Hmm.
anything that you need to find out, you know.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I have one more question. Then we're going to talk about some of like other commercial stuff you've been doing with industrial.
Okay.
But when you, I know we're bouncing around with, I just think of stuff and I'm like, oh, I forgot to ask about this. For
Yep.
when you're analyzing a property and you want to see what a good ROI would be, your return on investment for, or your cash on cash return, is it the same that you would want for a single family home? Because I'm used to wanting like a 10 or 12% cash on cash return for single family or multifamily? Is it the same or do you analyze it differently in that aspect?
Yeah, so everyone obviously is going to have their own numbers. Um, and the other thing that they don't talk about as much is the equity piece. So if you do have a mortgage, so they're going to say, well, my cash on cash, let's just say it's 10% for easy math. But what about all that equity that you're also using to pay down the mortgage? So
Mm-hmm.
uh, some people say, well, I need 10%. Well, if you're going to self storage, unless you have massive value add opportunity, you're probably not going to find that, because again, you're competing with high interest rates and all of these other uh, investor,
Mm-hmm.
institutional investors who can pay a little bit more. They can put more cash down and get that return. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it's tricky because you're balancing some non-fixed expenses. For example, the taxes in Denver and everywhere, but skyrocketed. We had some colleagues in storage that were like, our taxes went up 400%, like they quadrupled. And
Mm-hmm.
to that point, it's they're like, we can't even make payroll now because we're paying so much in taxes. And so how do you,
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of talk of, do we pass that on to our tenants? Like, say, oh, well, here's your rental rate, but now you're going to have an extra in fees and taxes, and you know what I mean? So how do we
Mm-hmm.
navigate this? That's a big reason I'm actually less inclined to go into Denver when you see certain landscapes, or even politically, where it's like, yeah, we're just going to increase taxes, increase taxes, increase taxes, or change policy overnight to where, for example, on some residential policies, well, we're going to cap the rental rates that you're allowed to increase. Luckily, right now, that doesn't exist in storage. But I have a feeling we're not that far off to where they're finally going to say, ooh, you can't just, because this is kind of an extension of their living quarters.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't go above a 10% increase, let's say. Well, the first year I went in, I increased 40% the rental rate. So
Mm-hmm.
as far as the return on your investment, um, if you're wanting higher returns, you have to be willing to do a little bit more work. And what I mean by that is knowing
Mm-hmm.
you're going to find a value add. I mean, you're not going to find something that just turnkey and get a 10 to 12% on your return.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times when you see, if you've ever looked into syndications or investment ventures, they're going to say 20% IRR. Well, that's different
Yeah.
than cash on cash. And they
Mm-hmm.
can't even predict that because they're planning on selling it for this much. Well, you cannot guarantee me that you're going to sell it for that much. You can't
Yeah.
guarantee me that rates are going to be favorable. So I want to know, what's my cash on cash return and what's my equity percent return. And if we talk about any of the warehousing, we can talk a little bit more about that. But I have to factor in at least cash on cash. My expenses have to be covered, maybe with a little surplus for reserves, like you said. Then I put my
Mm-hmm.
value add, then I add in the equity that we're getting. And then
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, that's kind of where I feel comfortable saying my
Mm-hmm.
returns are.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. So for other commercial real estate, you have some warehouses and industrial properties. Talk about those a little bit, and do you like them more than self storage now?
Yeah. So after the flood of competition that came into self-storage and just kind of getting tired of, oh, here's the other piece. I'm going to rewind a little bit. Self-storage is vastly different than industrial, like warehousing. And the reason is because self-storage is a business. You're not
Mhm.
just buying real estate, you actually have to run the business part of it. And the more automation you can do, that's great. But there's still sometimes day-to-day things. You're hiring an employee. Employees are difficult sometimes to
Mhm.
manage and to hire and to let go. And there's a whole nother aspect to it. With that being said, I do think businesses can have the option for better returns, but it is more work. Now, when you compare that to warehousing specifically, um, after getting into storage, I'm like, this is kind of more work than at least me right now having kids and wanting to also enjoy my life. And
Mhm.
I thought I need something a little bit more passive that I still have control over because there's a lot of investments. I could just go throw my money at somebody, but then I don't have control over that anymore. And it's funny because, like I said, our first storage was with someone else. I'm like, how did I trust them more than I trusted myself? And they did a great job, and we still are partners and do things with them. But it's just interesting that mindset. But with warehousing, it's more commercial. I compare self storage to single family like warehousing is to commercial. So in self storage, you
Mhm.
have individual families, people renting your units that are for their personal use. When you go to a
Mhm.
warehouse or a commercial office space, they're renting this for their business. And it's a whole different ballgame, a whole different class of people. And I just like that better. The day that I closed on our storage facility, I was up there, I was changing locks, I was gutting the apartment, I was doing all this work. The day that
Mhm.
I closed on our first warehouse, I literally sent 3 emails and said, I'm your new landlord, please send the rent here. Right. So um it's a different play. I don't the tenants manage the building. It's a triple net lease. So,
Mhm.
obviously if there's anything that needs to be done, I oversee that and pay for it, but then we bill them back through these leases but
Mhm.
that way I know the work's getting done and it's getting done to the quality that I want it and not,
Mhm.
well, I'm going to cut corners because I know I'm paying for it type thing. So,
Yeah.
so I do love warehousing and I feel like I started getting drawn towards that because storage just started to get so overly um, congested with a flood of investors and everybody
Mhm.
wanting to do it. And I thought, well, let me just do a little shift here. I'm still in industrial. I'm still in a very safe asset. And when I say safe, I'm meaning low default rate, low vacancy rate. So nationwide for the last 100 years, we've had such low vacancy rates, less than 5% in industrial. And so
Mhm.
I thought, that's kind of where I think I want to shift. If a home run storage deal came across my desk, I wouldn't turn it down, right? But
Mhm.
those are not really happening right now. And
Mhm.
so yeah, I've kind of shifted. I'm liking the warehouse better and better every day.
Awesome. That's really interesting to hear. And you had so much information. I'm probably gonna have to call you again once I learn more stuff. And I'm like, hey, a quick question about this because I learned a ton. So thank you so much. Um,
Yeah, well,
where would you
talk about. Oh,
recommend?
go ahead.
I was
Go
gonna say,
ahead.
where would you recommend I should start if it's self storage or industrial warehouses? For like my next step, since I have 3 properties, short term and long term rentals, moving on to like something big and like going straight big, not starting small, like you said earlier.
Yeah. So the biggest thing about industrial warehousing and commercial in general is knowing your lease types, what and that was probably, it's a lot of reading and it's monotonous, but there's some good books out there. I can send them to you that you can learn about the different types of leases. It is super boring, that part of it, but knowing, hey, when I evaluate a property and I find out that, well, this tenant, let's say for this is what happened to me with our warehouse, and luckily we have a great attorney because there's two tenants in the building. One tenant is at $4 a square foot. This is like unheard of, right? But this is warehouse. They pay less typically. And they locked this in like
Mhm.
15 years ago. They've been there forever. Well, guess their lease says upon the event that the other tenant leaves, we have first right of refusal. And this other tenant was paying $8 a foot. Now, if I go and buy that building and my second tenant leaves at $8 a foot, guess what's happening? I'm taking a pay cut. This is like worst case
Mhm.
scenario, right? I want to buy
Mhm.
something that's under rent so that I can increase the rate. Luckily, we caught that in the lease. So before we purchase, we say, hey, we need an amendment that says at market rate. So sure, you can have first right of refusal, but you're not getting it at $4 a foot. Otherwise, then I'm in the hole. So these are little things, especially for investors, that's important that they know that you're assessing those types of risks. What happens if I buy a building at $17 a foot in rents and that's top of the market? Well, my tenant leaves and I can't fill it. I can only fill it at 11. You're losing money, right? So
Mhm.
my value add strategy in warehousing is to buy something that has low in place rents. You might think, yeah, but then my return's not at great. Okay, maybe in the immediate 3 to 5 years, you're not going to get those immediate returns. But guess what? The minute that tenant leaves, you don't even have to come clear up to market rate. Even if you get more than what they're paying, you've got a whole ways to go from
Mhm.
here to here versus here to, do you see what I'm
Yeah.
saying, the difference there? And
Mhm.
so
Gotcha.
those little things, knowing how to look at a lease and what you're looking for, I think it's huge in knowing um, what to look for in a property.
Mhm.
Verifying the tenants. So if you're looking at a building that has a Fortune 200 company in it and a place that's like mom and pop, well, I'm probably going to put my eggs in the Fortune 200 company, knowing that they have 300 locations nationwide. If one goes out of business, they're still going to pay their rent.
Mhm.
Little things like that. Um,
Yeah.
but as far as getting started, you just have to do it. You just have to
Mhm.
do it. And that was for me. I would read and read and read and read. And finally, my husband's like, I'm going to go buy a facility. I'm going to know more than you within a month. And I
Yeah.
was like, you're so right. You just have to do it. And then, hopefully your mistakes aren't big enough to where they're too far gone. But
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah.
Last question, do you have a favorite inspirational quote since you've given so much great advice? I'm sure you got a good one.
God, this is tough because and real quick, going back to where to start, it's going to be what's going to work for you, right? Like we all have our different things. For me, um, I didn't want, some people invest out of state, but at least for my first few deals, I was like, I need to be able to drive there within a day if crap hits the fan. And I
Mhm.
got to go spend some time there. I don't want to constantly be worrying about something that's out of state. If, Denver's an hour from me, so I can get there. And luckily, I've got a great manager now. But so whatever works for you is, I would say a 4 hour drive is probably now where I'm like willing to go. But as far as
Mhm.
quotes go, um, I've got two. And so the
Okay.
first one is, if your dreams don't scare you, they aren't big enough. And I love that because it's like, you're
Mhm.
right. I mean, my goal now is to have 1 million square feet of commercial real estate. And that
Mhm.
mostly, hopefully, is it in industrial, warehousing and,
Mhm.
and self storage. But if they're not big enough, if they don't scare you, they're not big enough. And then the other one is to get started. So there's a book called the Horse, the Boy, the Fox, and the Mole. And the horse and the boy, they're in the woods, and the boy says to the horse, I can't see my way through. And the horse responds and he says, well, can you see your next step? So if you can't see the end, if you can at least see your next step, I think that's what's important. Just take that next step, and you'll eventually get there.
Mhm. Awesome. Thank you so much, Tiffany. That was some fantastic advice. I'm definitely going to have more questions once I do
Okay.
make my next step in real estate and stuff. But thank you again for joining me on the podcast.